to Ultimate Cry. As we look at our world today, many are wondering, how does a Christian respond to the issue of injustice? In the Bible, we find a powerful revelation that gives us our answer. In the book of Isaiah chapter 58, God calls Isaiah to rebuke the sins of his people. The interesting thing is that many Christians use Isaiah 58 and verse 1 for the purpose of rebuking doctrinal errors. While this understanding of the text definitely has its place, the context of the chapter reveals to us something even more startling. God rebukes Israel in this chapter not necessarily because its doctrines are wrong, but rather because its practical godliness is lacking. The people of Israel were fasting and pleading to know the Lord while at the same time mistreating their brother. We read in Isaiah 58 verse 3, "Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls, and you take no notice?" But God answers by saying, "In fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exploit your laborers," meaning God's people were oppressing those who worked for them. Not only that, but verse 4 continues by telling us, "Indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness." Then God says, "You will not fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high." God's people thought that they were all right when they were all wrong. They were seeking God while ignoring practical issues. Now, God does not leave his people in darkness concerning what kind of fast he wanted. Verse 6 states plainly, "Is this not the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke?" Do you know that the Hebrew word for wickedness in this passage actually means ethical and civil injustice? Therefore, God was calling his people to loosen the bands of or stand against ethical and civil injustices. The verse calls us to liberate those who are oppressed, not just in sin, but in society. And due to the verse mentioning civil and ethical injustices, we therefore realize that the church is not only called to address injustice in her midst, but injustice in society, in the secular and civil domain, because the verse calls out civil injustice. Friends, systemic racial injustice is part of ethical injustice. To remain silent concerning it is to tighten it, not loosen it, which is what the verse commands. Now, some may say, if I stand up for an ethical or civil issue, is this not becoming political? And is not a Christian to stay away from politics or political issues? The answer is in verse 6. For we see there that to stand against ethical and civil injustice is a biblical issue at its foundation, not a political one. Why? Because the last 6 commandments of the 10 commandments addresses how you should treat your fellow man. It addresses the area of the civil domain. Now, can a biblical issue be politicized? Of course. It's funny how people think that when one person stands for a certain cause, that it has to mean he or she is part of this or that political party. Yet I tell you the truth, though the issue of slavery was politicized, from the perspective of many a Christian abolitionist, it was a biblical issue because it affected the rights of their fellow man. How could they see their fellow man made in God's image being oppressed and remain silent? God forbid. The issues surrounding Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and many others are not demonstrations of victimhood, but issues establishing the veracity of the fact that a systemic problem exists that must be addressed. Now, in addition to this, God had Isaiah call Israel to even more practical works, such as undoing the heavy burdens, breaking every yoke, feeding the hungry, bringing the poor to our homes, and clothing the naked. This is practical godliness. And what does practical godliness lead to? Friends, you do not want to miss part 2. Let's just say that the success or failure to do what we mentioned in this video will determine whether the world is further darkened or illuminated. This is Ultimate Cry, crying out to many, all for the glory of one, Jesus Christ.